What happens when Hollywood royalty meets radio royalty and the gloves come off? What unfolds when a duchess steps into the lion's den expecting royal treatment but gets the Howard Stern experience instead? You won't believe what happened during last night's explosive episode that had the entire internet buzzing within minutes. Before we dive into this intense story, make sure you hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Because you're not going to believe what followed when Meghan Markle thought she could control the narrative on Howard Stern's show. The setup looked like a typical soft promotional interview. Meghan Markle, fresh off her newest media venture, had agreed to appear on the Howard Stern show to discuss her upcoming work and continue her carefully managed media rehabilitation tour. What nobody expected was that Howard wasn't in the mood to follow the usual celebrity PR routine. From the instant Meghan settled into the guest chair, something felt off. Howard's energy was sharper, his questions more direct. Studio 69 crackled with a tension that even longtime listeners could feel. Robin Quivers, Howard's co-host, sensed it immediately. Her usual warmth replaced by a watchful quiet. "So Meghan," Howard began, leaning back with his familiar predatory grin, "let's talk about authenticity. You've built this whole brand around being authentic, speaking your truth. But I have to ask you something that's been bothering me." He paused, letting the silence grow heavy. "When did you decide authenticity meant rewriting history every time you sit down for an interview?" The question struck like lightning. Meghan's media-trained smile slipped for a split second before returning. But Howard caught it. The audience caught it. Even over the radio, you could feel the shift. "I'm not sure what you mean by that." "Howard," Meghan replied, her voice maintaining the polished tone she'd perfected, "I've always been consistent in sharing my experiences and my truth." "Your truth," Howard repeated, drawing out each word. Interesting phrasing, because truth used to be truth. Now everyone's got their own version. Like Starbucks, everyone orders their own blend. The tension was obvious. Fred Norris, normally invisible behind the soundboard, seemed frozen, not sure whether to drop a sound effect. This wasn't a typical Howard Stern roast. It felt personal, sharp, dangerous. Meghan straightened, taking on the defensive posture royal watchers know well. "Howard, I think there's been a misunderstanding about my intentions. I'm here to talk about my new projects and the positive work I'm doing." "Oh, the positive work," Howard said, sarcasm dripping. "Let me ask you about that positive work. Does that include throwing your family under the bus every chance you get? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've made a career out of playing the victim while stepping on everyone who helped you get where you are." The studio fell silent except for the low hum of equipment. This wasn't going according to anyone's plan. Meghan's handlers behind the glass whispered frantically, unsure whether to intervene. "That's not fair, Howard," Meghan said, her voice gaining an edge. "You don't know what I've been through. You don't know the challenges I've faced or the racism I've experienced." "Racism?" Howard repeated flatly. "Right. So let me get this straight. You marry into one of the most privileged families on earth, get a multi-million-dollar fairy tale wedding, live in palaces, and your takeaway is that you're a victim of racism. Meanwhile, there are people dealing with real racism who don't get to complain about it from a Montecito mansion." The gloves were off. Meghan's carefully crafted persona started cracking as her voice rose. "You have no idea what it's like to be constantly scrutinized, to have every move dissected, to have your children's safety threatened." "Your children's safety threatened." Howard leaned forward, reporter instincts sharp. "By who?" "The paparazzi you call when you want positive press. The media machine you've been feeding for years. Or the family members you've been tearing down in interviews." Robin finally spoke. "Howard, maybe we should know." "Robin," Howard cut in, eyes locked on Meghan. "I think our guest wants a real conversation for once. Isn't that right, Meghan?" Isn't this what authenticity looks like? Or are you only authentic when you control the narrative? Meghan's composure was slipping. Her hands tightened on the chair. You're being incredibly disrespectful, Howard. I came here in good faith to have a conversation, not to be attacked. Attacked. Howard laughed without humor. This isn't an attack. This is what a real interview looks like when someone isn't handing you softball questions. You want to talk about disrespect. Let's talk about how you disrespected an entire institution, an entire family, and an entire country because things didn't go the way you wanted. The clash was intensifying. Meghan's team gestured wildly from behind the glass, but she was locked into the confrontation. Her polished composure was giving way to raw emotion. You don't understand the pressure I was under, Meghan fired back. The isolation, the lack of support, the way I was treated by the institution and the media. I had to protect myself and my family. Protect yourself. Howard raised his voice to match hers. By going on Oprah and torching everyone who helped you. By doing interviews and books where you paint yourself as the innocent victim while making everyone else the villain. That's not protection. That's character assassination with a PR team. The studio was electric. Neither would back down. What began as a promotional visit had become the most explosive confrontation in Howard Stern's show history. Everyone knew they were witnessing a moment that would be discussed for years. But this was only the beginning, because Howard Stern was far from done. And Meghan Markle was about to learn that controlling the narrative wouldn't be as simple as she imagined. The silence lingered for what felt like an eternity before Howard leaned back in his chair. That infamous smirk spreading across his face. He had drawn blood, and everyone in the room knew it. Instead of easing up, he pushed harder, like a shark sensing weakness in the water. You know what I find fascinating, Meghan? Howard asked, his voice deceptively calm, which somehow made it more threatening. You keep talking about being isolated and unsupported. But let's look at what actually happened. You had an entire PR machine behind you. You had staff, advisors, every resource. And yet somehow everyone around you was the problem. Everyone but you. Meghan's jaw tightened. That's a gross oversimplification of what I went through, Howard. You're reducing complex institutional problems. Howard cut in sharply. Is that what we're calling it when you can't get along with your sister-in-law? When you make bridesmaids cry? When staff quit because they can't work with you? At what point do you look in the mirror and think, maybe I'm the common denominator? The accusation hung in the air like poison. Robin shifted uncomfortably, and Fred stayed stiff behind his console. This was territory even Howard rarely touched. The complete dismantling of a guest's public persona in real time. That's not what happened, Meghan said, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. Those are tabloid narratives designed to tear me down. I was bullied by the British press from day one. And when I tried to defend myself, they called me difficult. Bullied by the British press, Howard repeated with a sharp laugh. The same press that gave you non-stop positive coverage when you started dating Harry. The same press that celebrated your engagement, your wedding, your pregnancy. They only turned on you when you started acting like you were bigger than the institution you married into. You don't know what you're talking about, Meghan snapped, her composure cracking. You weren't there. You didn't see what they did behind closed doors. You didn't experience the microaggressions, the subtle racism. The attempts to silence me when I tried to stand up for what was right. Howard pounced. Microaggressions, subtle racism. From the family that welcomed you, spent millions on your wedding, and gave you a platform bigger than most world leaders. Come on, Meghan. You're sitting here talking about racism, while you dragged the reputation of an elderly woman who dedicated her life to service. The mention of the Queen hit harder than anything else. Meghan's face flushed and her royal composure shattered. "Don't you dare lecture me about the Queen," she said, her voice rising enough that engineers scrambled at the controls. "You have no idea what that family is like behind closed doors. The silence, the complicity, the way they shield their own while throwing everyone else to the wolves. Their own." Howard leaned in aggressively. "Last I checked, you married into that family. Harry was their own till you convinced him to burn every bridge he had. You turned a war hero, a beloved prince, into your personal attack dog. How does it feel knowing you helped destroy his bond with his father, his brother, his entire heritage?" The studio vibrated with tension as Meghan's mask slipped entirely. "Harry made his own decisions. I didn't force him. He saw how I was treated, and he chose to protect his wife and children. That's what real men do. Protect." Howard's voice dripped disdain. "Is that what you call airing your family's private issues on global television? Making vague claims of racism without names, letting the internet drag innocent people, releasing personal conversations for profit? That's not protection, Meghan. That's revenge." The accusation hit hard. Meghan's hands shook, her makeup unable to hide the color spreading across her cheeks. Her team behind the glass panicked, signaling for her to stop the interview. But she was already too deep into the confrontation. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Meghan said, her voice shaking with fury. "Sitting in your studio, making jokes, pretending you understand what it's like to be a woman of color, navigating an institution built on centuries of privilege. You have no idea what I sacrificed, what I endured." "What you endured," Howard said, now rising from his chair and towering over the table. "You endured palaces. You endured a staff of dozens. You endured million-dollar jewelry and designer gowns. You endured the world celebrating your fairy tale wedding. My heart bleeds for you." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut. Robin tried once again to intervene. "Howard, maybe we should take a break." "No breaks," Howard snapped, eyes locked on Meghan. She wanted authenticity, a real conversation. Here it is. No handlers. No scripted questions. No safe space. Just truth. Meghan stood up too, her composure fully shattered. "You want truth? The truth is, you're a bully who delights in tearing people apart. You represent everything wrong with media: the cruelty, the lack of empathy, the willingness to destroy people for entertainment." "And you," Howard shot back, pointing straight at her, "represent everything wrong with modern celebrity culture. The victimhood, the entitlement, the refusal to take responsibility. You burn bridges for profit and then cry persecution when people won't work with you." The confrontation peaked, both of them standing across the table like adversaries in a gladiator arena. The studio staff froze, unsure whether to step in or let the historic meltdown continue. But Meghan wasn't done. Her eyes burned with fury as she prepared to deliver what she clearly believed would be the final killing blow, setting up what felt like the most explosive finale in talk show history. "You want to know what the real truth is, Howard?" Meghan's voice was pure venom now, her royal composure completely gone. "The real truth is that you're a has-been shock jock who peaked 20 years ago and now has to attack women to stay relevant. You're threatened by strong women who don't bow down to your pathetic attempts at intimidation." The studio went completely silent. Even Howard seemed briefly taken aback by the sheer audacity of the attack. But if Meghan thought she'd landed a decisive hit, she had badly underestimated who she was dealing with. Howard's expression shifted into the look longtime listeners recognized as his most dangerous, the calm before the storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, and absolutely lethal. "Strong women," Howard repeated, each word soaked in contempt. "Lady, I've interviewed actual strong women. Oprah built an empire from nothing. Barbara Walters smashed through barriers when journalism was a boys' club. Hillary Clinton clawed her way to the top of American politics. You married into royalty and then spent every waking minute complaining about how hard your life was. That's not strength. That's the opposite of strength. Meghan's face went pale with rage. How dare you compare me to other women like we're in some misogynistic ranking system? You don't get to define what strength looks like for women, especially women of color, who face challenges. You could never understand. Women of color, Howard's voice rose to meet hers. You want to talk about women of color? Let's talk about all the women of color who actually deal with real discrimination, real poverty, real hardship while you sit in a mansion complaining that the royal family didn't appreciate your Hollywood background enough. You've turned your mixed-race heritage into a weapon you pull out whenever someone criticizes your behavior. The accusation was so blunt, so direct, that the entire studio seemed to recoil. Fred actually looked up from his board for the first time all interview, his eyes wide. Robin's mouth hung open. Even Meghan's handlers had stopped their frantic motions and were simply staring in horror. That is disgusting. Meghan hissed, her voice now shaking with pure fury. You're disgusting to sit there and minimize the racism I've experienced. To dismiss my struggles because I had privileges. That is exactly the kind of toxic masculinity and white privilege I've been fighting my entire adult life. White privilege. Howard laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. I'm the son of a radio engineer from Queens who worked his way up from nothing. You grew up in Hollywood, went to private schools, had acting coaches, and married a prince, but somehow I'm the privileged one. The delusion is incredible. Meghan was visibly shaking now, her perfectly done makeup beginning to run as her emotional control completely collapsed. You don't know anything about my childhood. About what I went through growing up biracial in America. About the struggles I faced trying to make it in Hollywood as a woman of color. Struggles in Hollywood. Howard pounced, like a predator. You mean the struggles that got you a starring role on a hit TV show? The struggles that put you on red carpets and in magazines. The struggles that introduced you to the circles where you met a prince. Those struggles. Because from where I'm sitting, Hollywood seems to have worked out pretty well for you. The confrontation had hit a level of intensity no one in the studio had ever seen. Meghan was openly crying now, but they were tears of rage, not sorrow. Her entire body trembled as she pointed a shaking finger at Howard. You are everything that is wrong with this world, she shouted, her voice cracking. You sit there in your privileged position, tearing down women, especially women of color, for entertainment. You're a relic of a toxic era the world is moving past. And you, Howard roared back, now fully unleashed, are everything that's wrong with modern celebrity culture. You take every advantage, use every privilege, exploit every opportunity, then play the victim when people call you out. You've turned victimhood into a brand, and frankly, it's pathetic. The word pathetic seemed to break something. Meghan's face twisted with pure rage as she snatched her purse from beside her chair and stood so abruptly her chair nearly toppled. I don't have to sit here and listen to this abuse from a washed-up radio host who thinks he's still relevant, she yelled, her voice now hoarse from the strain. You're nothing but a bully with a microphone, and I'm done giving you the attention you so desperately crave. There it is, Howard called out as she started toward the studio door. The real Meghan Markle. When things don't go your way, when you can't control the narrative, when someone asks real questions, instead of kissing your royal behind you run, just like you ran from your family, just like you ran from England. Just like you run from every situation where you can't be the victim. Meghan spun at the doorway, her face streaked with tears and twisted in fury. You know what, Howard? History will remember me as someone who stood up for what was right. Who fought against racism and inequality? Who used my platform to make the world better? You'll be remembered as a sad old man who got his kicks humiliating women on the radio. History, Howard laughed one last time. History will remember you as the woman who married a prince and then spent the rest of her life complaining about it. The woman who had everything and still wasn't satisfied. The woman who turned being a royal into a professional grievance. With that final exchange, Meghan Markle yanked the studio door open so hard it slammed into the wall. Her team scrambled after her as she stormed down the hallway, her heels hammering furiously against the floor. The sound of her departure echoed through the studio as the door slowly swung shut behind her. Howard stayed standing for a moment, breathing hard, before slowly lowering himself back into his chair. The studio was utterly silent, except for the low hum of the gear and the faint sound of elevator doors closing as Meghan and her team made their exit. Robin was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Well, that was that," Howard said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Was exactly what happens when someone who's used to controlling every interview, every narrative, every conversation meets someone who doesn't play by their rules." Fred finally spoke. "I've been here 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that." Howard nodded, still catching his breath from the intensity. "That's what authenticity really looks like, folks. Not the sanitized, focus-grouped version celebrities try to sell you. Real authenticity is messy. It's uncomfortable. And sometimes it exposes things people would rather keep hidden." As the studio slowly drifted back toward normal staff moving again, equipment being adjusted, it was obvious to everyone present that they had just witnessed something unprecedented. The most explosive celebrity meltdown in radio history had unfolded live, and the shockwaves would ripple through the media for months. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional stop had instead turned into a masterclass in what happens when Hollywood privilege collides with New York bluntness. When carefully constructed public personas crash into unfiltered questions. And when someone who's spent years controlling their narrative finally faces a moment they can't manipulate. Howard leaned into the microphone one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was Meghan Markle showing us exactly who she really is when the cameras are rolling and she can't edit the footage. Sometimes the most revealing interviews are the ones where the guest reveals more than they ever meant to." And with that, one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history came to its dramatic end, leaving listeners nationwide stunned by what they'd just heard and guaranteeing that this interview would be discussed, dissected, and replayed for years to come.